The copper sky bled with the dying sun as Delilah Morgan staggered through the barren landscape, her once white dress now stained with dirt, sweat, and blood that wasn't entirely her own. The year was 1879, and this desolate stretch of New Mexico territory had claimed more lives than the cholera outbreak of '66. Delilah no longer cared if it claimed hers too. Her legs finally gave out near a creek bed outside Truth or Consequences, a newly established settlement that had sprung up after the railroad came through. The irony of the town's name wasn't lost on her as she collapsed onto the dusty ground, her body racked with fever and exhaustion. 3 days on the run, 3 days of nothing but stolen water and wild berries. 3 days since she'd shot her husband dead and fled their homestead with nothing but the clothes on her back and his blood on her hands. It was there, face down in the dirt, that Drake Thornton found her. The young rancher had been tracking a stray calf when he spotted what he first thought was a bundle of discarded laundry. When the bundle moved and let out a weak moan, he dismounted his horse in a hurry. "Madam," he called, approaching cautiously. Years in the West had taught him to be wary of strangers, especially those who looked half dead. Delilah lifted her head just enough to see dusty boots approaching. She felt a wave of terror. They'd found her. The law had found her until she managed to focus on the face of the stranger crouching beside her. A face too kind to be a lawman hunting a murderer. "Please," she whispered, her voice like sandpaper. "Please let me die." Drake studied her face, taking in the dirt-smudged features, the feverish eyes, and the determination of someone who had already accepted death. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers during the war, in the faces of settlers who'd lost everything to raids or drought. "You already did," he said softly, surprising himself with the words. "Now live with me instead." He didn't know why he said it. Perhaps it was the desolation in her eyes that reminded him of his own loneliness since losing his parents to smallpox 5 years earlier. Perhaps it was simply that he couldn't bear to see another soul lost to this unforgiving land. "What?" Delilah croaked, uncertain she had heard him correctly. "Whoever you were before, whatever brought you here, that life is over. You died out here in the desert." Drake pulled his canteen from his belt and held it to her cracked lips. "But you can start again. My ranch isn't far. You need help." Delilah wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him that a bullet would be kinder than prolonging her suffering. But her body betrayed her as her parched throat automatically swallowed the water he offered. She had no strength left to argue as he gently lifted her onto his horse. "I'm Drake Thornton," he said, mounting behind her and steadying her weakened body against his chest. "And I reckon you'll tell me your name when you're ready." "Delilah," she murmured, already drifting into unconsciousness. "Delilah Morgan." Drake's ranch was modest compared to some of the larger operations in the territory, but it was well kept and far enough from town to provide the privacy Delilah desperately needed. The main house was a sturdy 2-room cabin with a front porch that faced east, catching the morning light. A small barn housed his horses, and the few cattle he kept close, while his main herd grazed on the surrounding grasslands. For 3 days, Delilah drifted in and out of consciousness as fever gripped her body. Drake did what he could: cool compresses, willow bark tea, and broth spooned carefully between her lips when she was lucid enough to swallow. On the 4th morning, he woke to find her sitting up in his bed, clear-eyed and wary. "Where am I?" she asked, though she remembered fragments of their encounter and the journey to his home. "My ranch, about 8 miles outside Truth or Consequences," Drake answered, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. "You've been fevered for days." Delilah's hands twisted in the clean bedsheets. "You should have left me." "Not my way," Drake said simply. He poured a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove and offered it to her. "Figured whatever drove you to want death must be mighty powerful, but it ain't my place to judge." She accepted the cup with trembling hands. "The law will come looking for me." Drake nodded thoughtfully. "Figured as much. Want to tell me what happened?" Delilah hesitated, then realized this man had already decided to help her without knowing her crimes. She owed him the truth. "I killed my husband," she said flatly. "Shot him with his own revolver while he slept." Drake showed no surprise, no judgment in his expression. "He hurt you for 6 years," Delilah whispered. "But that night he said he'd sold me to his friend to settle a gambling debt. Said I'd be entertaining his friend starting the next morning." A muscle in Drake's jaw tightened. Then he had it coming. Delilah stared at him in disbelief. "I murdered a man." "Sounds to me like you executed a monster," Drake corrected. "Not saying the law will see it that way, but I do." Tears filled Delilah's eyes for the first time since that terrible night. She had expected disgust, fear, or at the very least for Drake to demand she leave his home. His understanding was almost more than she could bear. "I can't stay here," she said, wiping her eyes roughly. "I'll bring trouble to your door." Drake sat on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Truth or consequences ain't exactly a hub of law enforcement. Sheriff comes through maybe once a month from Las Cruces. Besides, you said yourself Delilah Morgan is dead." "Died of fever in the desert, I reckon." "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "Stay, heal up, become someone new." His eyes met hers steadily. "I could use help around the ranch, got more work than hands." "Why would you risk harboring a fugitive?" Drake's smile was small but genuine. "Let's just say I know something about needing a second chance, and I've been out here alone too long." Over the following weeks, Delilah gradually regained her strength. Drake gave her his bed while he slept on a pallet in the main room, and he never once made her uncomfortable with unwanted advances. They fell into an easy rhythm, Drake handling the cattle and outdoor chores while Delilah took over the cooking and garden. When she felt strong enough, she began helping with the livestock too, proving herself handy with horses in particular. They invented a new past for her, Delilah Taylor, a widow from Missouri who had come west to start over after losing her husband to influenza. It wasn't far from the truth. In many ways, Delilah had been a widow long before she'd fired that fatal shot, her marriage having died years earlier under the weight of her husband's cruelty. Spring turned to summer, and with each passing day, Delilah felt more of her old self returning, not the frightened wife she'd been, but the spirited young woman who had once dreamed of adventure and independence before marriage had crushed those dreams. Drake noticed the change in her, how she held herself taller, how her laugh came more easily, how she began to sing softly while working in the garden. It stirred something in him that he had thought long buried, a longing for companionship that went beyond the practical arrangement they had established. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Delilah finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "What did you mean that day you found me? When you said I already died?" Drake took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "My pa used to say that sometimes a person has to die to themselves before they can truly live. Saw it happen to him after the war. He was never the same man who left, but he found a way to be someone new, someone better." "And you? Have you died before?" Drake's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Once. During the war. Was just a boy when I joined up with the Union forces in '63. Lied about my age. Saw things no person should see. Did things I still can't speak of." He paused. "The boy who left home died at Gettysburg. The man who came back had to figure out how to live with what was left." Delilah's hand found his in the gathering dusk. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact between them, and Drake's breath caught at the simple touch. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me a chance to be someone new." As summer wore on, their tentative friendship deepened. Drake taught Delilah to shoot, determined that she would never again be defenseless. She proved to be a natural marksman, her hands steady and her eye keen. In return, she brought warmth and life back into the lonely ranch house, planting flowers alongside the vegetable garden and hanging curtains she had sewn from fabric purchased on their infrequent trips into town. They were careful during these ventures into truth or consequences, with Delilah keeping her head down and interaction with townspeople minimal. The settlement was small but growing, with the railroad bringing new settlers almost weekly. No one paid much attention to the quiet rancher and his supposed widowed cousin who kept to themselves. It was during one such trip in late August that Delilah's carefully constructed new life nearly shattered. Drake had gone to purchase supplies while she waited in the wagon outside the general store. A dust cloud on the main street announced the arrival of riders, and Delilah's blood froze when she recognized one of the men dismounting in front of the sheriff's office. Thomas Reeves had been her husband's closest friend and business partner in their freight company. If anyone would recognize her, it would be him. Panic seized her as she ducked her head, pulling her bonnet lower to shield her face. When Drake emerged from the store, she grasped his arm with trembling fingers. "We need to leave. Now," she whispered urgently. Drake followed her gaze to the newcomers and immediately understood. Without a word, he loaded their supplies quickly and helped her into the wagon, keeping his body between her and the men's line of sight. They departed town at a casual pace, not wanting to draw attention, but once they were out of view, Drake urged the horses to a gallop. "Someone you know?" he asked when they were safely distant. "My husband's partner," Delilah confirmed, her face pale. "If he's here, it means they're still looking for me." Drake's jaw set in a determined line. "Then we'll need to be more careful." That evening, as they unloaded their supplies, the weight of her situation pressed down on Delilah once more. "I can't keep putting you at risk, Drake. Maybe I should move on, head further west." Drake set down a sack of flour with more force than necessary. "Running won't solve anything. You'd be alone, vulnerable. Is that what you want?" "Of course not," Delilah snapped, her fear making her sharp. "But what happens when they come looking here? What happens when they find out you've been harboring a murderess?" "Let them come," Drake said quietly, his voice steady. "This is your home now. I won't let them take you." The word home caught in Delilah's chest. She hadn't had a real home since her parents died when she was 16, leaving her with few options except marriage to a man who had shown his true nature only after the wedding vows were spoken. "Why?" she asked, emotion thickening her voice. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Drake stepped closer, his eyes holding hers. "Because in these past months you've brought life back to this place. Back to me." He hesitated, then added softly, "Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Delilah." The admission hung in the air between them. Delilah felt her heart hammering against her ribs, fear and longing warring within her. She had sworn after escaping her marriage that she would never belong to another man, never put herself at anyone's mercy again. But Drake had shown her nothing but respect, had asked for nothing in return for his help. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "Love, marriage, they're just words men use to own women." "Not to me," Drake said firmly. "I don't want to own you, I want to stand beside you. Partners, equals." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll wait as long as you need, and if friendship is all you can ever offer, I'll be grateful for that." That night, Delilah lay awake long after Drake had retired to his pallet in the main room. His words circled in her mind, along with the memory of Thomas Reeves in town. Danger and possibility seemed equally balanced on a knife's edge, and for the first time since fleeing her old life, Delilah found herself desperately wanting to live not just to survive, but to truly live and perhaps even love again. The autumn brought cooler temperatures and the annual cattle drive to the railhead in Las Cruces. Drake couldn't avoid the trip. It was his livelihood, but leaving Delilah alone at the ranch for potentially weeks was unthinkable with Reeves still in the area. "Come with me," Drake suggested as they discussed the dilemma over breakfast. "The trail boss is an old friend who owes me a favor. He won't ask questions." Delilah considered the proposal. A cattle drive meant being in close proximity to a dozen or more cowboys, increasing the risk of recognition. But staying alone at the ranch while Drake was gone presented its own dangers. "Would I be the only woman?" she asked. Drake nodded. "It's not common, but not unheard of either. Trail boss's wife joined the last drive when they were short-handed." After careful consideration, Delilah agreed. They spent the next week preparing, with Drake teaching her the basics of what to expect on the trail. He provided her with more practical clothing: trousers, shirts, and a wide-brimmed hat that would shield her face from both sun and curious eyes. The cattle drive began in early October with 15 men, over 200 head of cattle, and Delilah, who was introduced as Drake's widowed cousin, helping out. The trail boss, Jackson Miller, was a grizzled man in his 50s who merely raised an eyebrow at Delilah's presence before assigning her to help the cook, an arrangement that suited her perfectly as it kept her somewhat separate from the cowboys. Life on the trail was arduous but oddly freeing. Delilah found she enjoyed the open sky above them each night, the simple routine of work, rest, and more work. Most of the men were respectful, if curious, and those who weren't quickly faced Drake's quiet but unmistakable warning to mind their manners. It was on the third night of the drive that Delilah and Drake found a rare moment alone together, sitting slightly apart from the others after the evening meal. The campfire cast a warm glow over their faces as they spoke in low voices. "You're doing well out here," Drake observed. "Most city folks would have turned back after the first day," Delilah smiled. "I wasn't always a city wife. My father had a small farm in Kentucky before he lost it. I helped with the animals, the planting. You never mentioned that before." "There's a lot I haven't told you," Delilah admitted. "Talking about the past. It wasn't safe for so long that I learned to keep it locked away." Drake nodded in understanding. "No pressure. Just nice to learn more about you." Under the vast canopy of stars, Delilah found herself wanting to share more. "I used to dream of having my own land someday. A place where I made the decisions, where no one could tell me what to do or who to be." "Still want that?" Drake asked. "Yes," she said softly. "But I've learned there's room in dreams for more than just independence. There's room for connection too." Their eyes met in the firelight and Drake's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. For the first time, Delilah didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer until their shoulders touched, a simple contact that carried the weight of growing trust. The peaceful moment was shattered by shouts from the perimeter of the camp. Men scrambled for weapons as horses whinnied in distress. Drake was on his feet instantly, pulling Delilah up with him. "Rustlers!" someone yelled, and gunfire erupted in the darkness. Drake pushed Delilah toward the chuck wagon. "Stay down," he ordered before drawing his pistol and moving toward the commotion. Heart pounding, Delilah crouched behind the wagon, watching shadows move in the firelight. The cattle were restless, threatening to stampede if the shooting continued. Without thinking about the danger, She grabbed a rifle from the cook's supplies and headed for the remuda to prevent the horses from breaking loose, knowing they'd be stranded without them. The firefight was brief, but intense. 3 rustlers had attempted to cut away part of the herd during the night, not expecting to find so many armed men ready to defend their livelihood. 2 fled into the darkness while one lay wounded near the horses, his gun still clutched in his hand as he tried to take aim at one of the cowboys approaching him. Delilah saw the danger before anyone else. "Look out!" she shouted, raising her rifle and firing in one fluid motion. The wounded rustler jerked backward, his shot going wild as Delilah's bullet found its mark. Silence fell over the camp as men turned to stare at the woman standing steady with a smoking rifle. Drake pushed through the crowd, his face a mixture of concern and amazement. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, quickly checking her for injuries. "I'm fine," Delilah assured him. "The horses are still here. We didn't lose any." The trail boss approached, eyeing the dead rustler and then Delilah with newfound respect. "That was some shooting, madam. Where'd you learn to handle a rifle like that?" Before she could answer, a voice from the edge of the gathering froze her blood. "I'd know that shot anywhere. Girl always could outshoot most men." Thomas Reeves stepped into the firelight, his expression hardening as he stared at Delilah. He'd been hired as an extra hand for the drive just that morning when one of the original cowboys had fallen ill. Well, he continued. "If it isn't Delilah Morgan back from the dead. Been looking for you ever since you murdered poor Harold." Murmurs spread through the gathered men as Drake moved protectively in front of Delilah. "You're mistaken," he said firmly. "This is Delilah Taylor, my cousin." Reeves spat on the ground. "Like hell she is. That's Harold Morgan's wife, and she put a bullet in him while he slept. There's a bounty on her head." The trail boss looked between Reeves and Delilah, his expression guarded. "This true, madam?" Delilah's mind raced with possible lies, excuses, but she was tired of running, tired of hiding who she was. She stepped out from behind Drake, keeping the rifle ready. "I killed Harold Morgan," she said clearly. "After he beat me for 6 years and then tried to sell me to settle a gambling debt. He got what he deserved." A tense silence followed her confession. Drake's hand hovered near his holster, ready to defend her if necessary, but the expected condemnation didn't come. Instead, Jackson Miller nodded slowly. "Had a sister once whose husband treated her the same," he said grimly. "Wish she'd had your courage." Reeves looked incredulous. "You're taking her side. She's a murderer. Sounds like self-defense to me," one of the older cowboys remarked, and several others murmured in agreement. Reeves's hand edged toward his gun. "There's still a bounty, dead or alive." "Don't," Drake warned, his voice deadly quiet. "You won't leave this camp alive if you try." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats before Jackson intervened. "No more blood tonight. Reeves, you'll get your pay and clear out at first light. The rest of you back to your posts. We still have cattle to protect." Reeves glared but recognized he was outnumbered. "This isn't over," he promised before stalking away toward his bedroll. That night, Drake insisted Delilah stay close to him, both of them sleeping fitfully with weapons within reach. At dawn, they discovered Reeves had slipped away during the night, taking one of the spare horses. "He'll go to the authorities," Delilah said, resignation in her voice, "or come back with others." Drake conferred briefly with Jackson before returning to her side. "Change of plans. You and I are breaking off from the drive. Jackson will get our cattle to market and hold the money for us." "Where will we go?" Delilah asked. "North, into Colorado territory. I have friends there, people who won't ask questions." Drake's expression was determined. "We'll start fresh again." They departed within the hour, riding hard across the New Mexico landscape. Drake knew these lands well. choosing paths that would be difficult to follow and stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. They traveled mostly at night, keeping off main trails and away from settlements. On the third day, as they made camp in a sheltered canyon, Delilah finally voiced the thought that had been troubling her. "You're giving up everything for me. Your ranch, your life in New Mexico." Drake looked up from building their small fire. "Land is just land, can find that anywhere." "But it was your home." "Home isn't a place, Delilah." Drake moved to sit beside her. "It's where you feel you belong, with who you belong." The simple truth of his words struck her deeply. All her life, Delilah had been searching for a place to call her own, never realizing that perhaps home could be a person rather than a location. "I'm not running anymore," she said suddenly, decisively. "I'm tired of letting fear control my life." Drake studied her face in the growing firelight. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we find a place to settle, build something that's ours, and if trouble comes, we face it together." She took his hand in hers. "I'm saying I want a life with you, Drake Thornton, for however long we have." Drake's breath caught. "You sure about this?" "It won't be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," Delilah replied. Then, gathering her courage, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in their first kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as Drake responded with gentle passion. When they finally parted, Drake rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since about 2 days after you started getting better," he admitted. Delilah laughed softly. "I've been wanting to let you for almost as long." They reached Colorado territory a week later, making their way to a small settlement called Silverdale, nestled in a valley between towering mountains. Drake's friend, a former Union officer turned rancher, welcomed them without prying, offering work and a small cabin on his property until they could establish themselves. Winter came early to the mountains, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glistening wonderland. Delilah and Drake were married by a traveling preacher just before the first heavy snowfall, a simple ceremony with only a few witnesses from the neighboring homesteads. No one questioned their past. In this frontier land, most people were seeking fresh starts of their own. With money from their cattle sale, they purchased a modest parcel of land in the spring, a sloping meadow backed by pine forest with a clear stream running through it. Together they built a cabin, larger and sturdier than the one they'd left behind in New Mexico. Delilah planted a garden while Drake acquired a small herd to start their new ranch. They were prepared when Thomas Reeves finally tracked them down a year later, arriving with 2 hired guns and the smug confidence of a man who thought he held all the cards. What he hadn't counted on was Delilah's determination never to be a victim again, nor the community that had embraced the hardworking couple as their own. When Reeves approached their cabin, he found not just Drake and Delilah waiting for him, but half a dozen neighbors as well, all armed and standing firmly on the Thornton side. "You're not welcome here, Reeves," Drake said calmly from the porch, rifle in hand. "Turn around and ride out." Reeves sneered. "I've got a paper says she's wanted for murder. Law's on my side." "Law's a long way from here," one of the neighbors observed, "and we take care of our own in Silverdale." Faced with overwhelming odds, Reeves and his men eventually retreated, though not before promising to return with proper authorities. But they never did. Whether he lost interest in the bounty or met his own trouble along the way, Thomas Reeves faded from their lives like a bad dream upon waking. As the years passed, the Thornton Ranch prospered. Their herd grew, as did their reputation for fair dealing and hospitality. In the spring of 1883, their family expanded with the birth of their son, Samuel, followed 2 years later by twins, a boy and girl they named James and Elizabeth. On warm evenings, Drake and Delilah would sit on their porch watching their children play in the yard, marveling at how far they had come from that desperate day by the creek bed. "You ever regret it?" Delilah asked once, her head resting on Drake's shoulder. "Taking in a half-dead woman who asked you to let her die?" Drake's arm tightened around her waist. "Not for a single moment. Best decision I ever made was telling you that you'd already died." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And asking you to live with me instead." Delilah smiled, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The life they had built together wasn't perfect. There were hardships, arguments, days when the past threatened to overshadow the present, but it was theirs, forged from choice rather than obligation, from love rather than fear. "I'm glad I lived," she said softly. "I'm glad I found the courage to live again." As night settled over their mountain valley, stars appearing one by one in the vastness above, Delilah Morgan Thornton finally knew with absolute certainty that she was home,